Call the Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
I present a legislative statement on the term of Parliament enabling four-year term legislation amendment bill.
This legislative statement is published under the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website. Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
I move that the term of Parliament enabling a four-year term legislation amendment bill be now read a first time, and I nominate the Justice Committee to consider the bill. The bill is an omnibus bill that amends the Constitution Act 1986 and the Electoral Act 1993 to enable a four-year parliamentary term. Under this bill, the standard maximum term of Parliament will remain 3 years, with the potential to extend the term of Parliament to 4 years at the start of each parliamentary term if a specific condition is met. The specific condition is that the membership of a subject select committee is proportionate to the non-executive party membership of the House. In effect, the bill creates a variable term of Parliament. A proposal to extend the term of Parliament to 4 years has gone to referendum twice before, once in the late 1960s, and curiously I've written a couple of books about participants in that debate, and the last time was in 1990, where voters chose to retain a 3-year parliamentary term. Time has passed since then, and New Zealand has changed significantly in the intervening 35 years, particularly with the introduction of MMP, and so the coalition government has, in introducing this bill, decided that it's a time at least to consider having that debate again. Now, the arguments for and against a 4-year term are reasonably well canvassed. The primary argument in favour is the hope and expectation that a longer term will lead to improved law making. A four-year term would provide a longer period of effective decision making and legislating before the political challenges of the election year come around. Quite often first-term governments will spend a portion of the first year establishing themselves and then a significant proportion of their third year preparing for re-election, and that time of effective decision making is relatively limited, and so a 4-year term would allow for a longer period. It also has the potential to reduce the disruption caused by more regular changes of government, which would benefit longer-term policy projects such as infrastructure, where the cost of change can be high. New Zealand is relatively rare as one of only 3 nations with similar systems with a 3-year term. The Australian Federal Parliament has a 3-year term, but interestingly, all of the states have, over the past few decades, shifted to a 4-year term, and some will argue that that works well. The primary argument against is that New Zealand Parliament faces relatively few checks and balances, and that argues for more regular opportunities for the electorate to pass judgment on the government's success or otherwise, and if they're not happy, to throw them out. So the bill, as addressed, is introduced, addresses that concern by strengthening the checks and balances on the government through the select committee requirement to help balance the effect of a longer term. In practice, this would typically result in opposition parties having more seats on the subject select committees and quite likely having a majority on those committees, and that would is intended to enable stronger accountability and increased scrutiny on the government. So the trade-off would be a longer period, but increased scrutiny through the select committees. Key provisions in the bill allow the term to be extended by a proclamation issued by the Governor-General. A proclamation can only be issued if the House of Representatives has passed a resolution confirming that the proportionality required is satisfied. The resolution of the House would need to be passed within 3 months of the first reading of Parliament, which means that this process can only occur once in the parliamentary term. It's also important to note that even if the select committee condition was met, it's up to the members of Parliament to choose whether to move or support any resolution to extend the term. Mr Speaker, the current 3-year maximum term is entrenched, recognising the constitutional significance of this, and so the bill proposes to entrench key settings enabling a 4-year term alongside this. If passed, this will protect the key constitutional changes provided for in the bill in the same way that the existing provision provides for the current maximum 3-year term. Given the constitutional significance of the term of Parliament, it's appropriate to give the public the choice to vote directly on the matter in a nationwide referendum. This means that key provisions of the bill would only come into effect following a referendum where the majority of voters supported the change. To this end, the bill sets out the proposed referendum question and 2 options for response that voters must decide upon. It's possible that a referendum could be held alongside the next general election in 2026. However, any final decisions on the timing of a referendum will depend on what comes out of the select committee process. Future decisions will also need to be made by the government as to whether the bill proceeds as introduced or whether it should be amended. Both the National Act and National New Zealand First Coalition agreements include supporting a bill to a select committee that would enact a binding referendum on a 4-year term. At this stage, I want to make the point, no decisions have been made on whether the bill will proceed beyond this point. And the intention is that we want to hear from what New Zealanders think during the select committee process. And so all New Zealanders will have an opportunity to have their say. We think it's important for New Zealanders to consider this from time to time, and then ultimately the government has to make a judgment in Parliament ultimately as to whether we think it's time to press ahead and actually have a referendum on this and exactly what the referendum should be. To allow for the possibility of a referendum on this matter, the Referendums Framework Bill has also been progressed to provide a generic framework for the conduct of a referendum. The select committee process is very important to discuss this fundamental constitutional issue. I encourage members of the public to have their say when the Justice Committee calls for submissions. And on that basis, Madam Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
Okay.
I'm not happy about giving the power to the elected government for 3 months after the election to decide whether they want to do it.
It should either be 3 years or 4 years. It should not be who knows what's happening when you're putting your two ticks on the ballot paper.
Yeah, I mean, I recommend everyone to read the regulatory impact statement. I did post a link to that in the chat just before. So I've got a bit of a quotation from that regulatory impact statement because I was reading it today, and I quote, "There is limited evidence/research generally on how the maximum length of the term of Parliament impacts on decision-making and legislation, public engagement, parliamentary scrutiny, and longer-term planning and economic costs. Nor is there evidence of the efficiency and contribution to parliamentary scrutiny of other potential additional executive scrutiny mechanisms. Cost-benefit information is therefore very limited with a low confidence factor, although some election costs may be quantifiable." So what the regulatory impact statement is saying is that we don't have any evidence. We don't know if this is going to improve things or make things worse. So we're in kind of a no man's land with this one.
And
we don't know what's going to happen.
And I think that's also because of the bill itself.
Mm-hmm.
I think because we have a unicameral parliament, this is a very dangerous step because there's no upper body that has a veto power for anything.
That was actually one of the recommendations that was in the regulatory impact statement is you kind of need to have an upper house when you start extending out terms.
I would go further and say you need to have an upper house that is tasked exclusively with making sure that legislation complies with Te Tiriti and also the Bill of Rights with the veto power to knock it back if it doesn't. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean,
I would feel happy with a 4-year term, otherwise no.
Select committees are not a replacement for an upper house. They're two different things.
They make recommendations. They have no real power.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to government bills, you can pretty much basically undo a select committee's work between second and third reading.
Yep.
I know one bill that got scrapped because the select committee really basically destroyed its complete intention of what it was trying to be, which was doing with with gender changes for trans people.
Well, look at the select committee on the medicinal cannabis bill. That wasn't able to make any recommendations to the government because of the fact that it was split 50-50 and they couldn't get a majority decision out of it. Wasted everyone's time there.
Yeah, that's a point. Yeah, and that's actually happened on a few occasions. Or you get bills that have been recommended not to pass by select committee because the government is in control, such as Camilla Bellich's and Ibrahim Omar's crime theft by employer amendment bill, and the fact that it's heading down the direction that it's going to pass third reading next Wednesday.
All they have to do is say that they've considered the recommendations. That's all they have to do.
Well, I mean, going back to that regulatory impact statement, the Ministry of Justice actually considered 3 options. They actually considered option 3, which is what this bill is, to be the worst option. And National went for it anyways. They wanted option 2.
It'll be David Seymour wanted it.
Oh, yeah, David Seymour. Yeah, so the Ministry of Justice actually recommended option 2, which is to hold a referendum on a maximum 4-year term of Parliament. So it kind of so people understood that, okay, every 4 years we're going to have an election, not this flippy-floppy. Yeah.
I see nothing in this bill that's going to reduce the level of lip service accountability.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to our Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, News Guide, the Order Paper Podcast. YouTube, Twitch, Instagram.